Hello Year 7. So this is first Year 7 video I've made in a while, but I thought I'd do one today because all of you this week and last week have been looking at a new topic in medieval England. We've been looking at a particular king, and that is King John. So today I'm going to talk about King John and the issue of why were the barons so angry with King John? Why were they so angry with him? So we've been looking at this, why the barons were so angry with him. Now, first of all, we've come across the word barons before, and we've come across the word nobles before. But another word that you might come across when we're looking in certain textbooks or whatnot, that is a good word to know, is the word magnates. Okay, so we've got all of these groups of people. Well, they're basically the same things, the barons and the nobles. The magnates is basically a group of all the important people in England, and the barons or nobles make up the magnates. The magnates also are made up of people like bishops, as well as the barons and the nobles. But that's what we're kind of focusing on. Why did King John make these people, the barons and the nobles and the magnates, so angry? So there were loads of different reasons why John made those people angry. I'm going to talk about just a few of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about the main ones. So the first reason that the barons were angry with King John was John meddled in ecclesiastical matters, which is a posh way of saying that he meddled with church matters. That's what ecclesiastical means, church, okay, or church matters. So John meddled with church matters, ecclesiastical matters. Now, what were these ecclesiastical matters that he meddled with? Well, it was all to do with the Archbishop of Canterbury. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, in the year 1205, died. And obviously he needed to be replaced because the Archbishop of Canterbury was, and still is really, the most important position in the English church. So it's a really, really important position. And when the Archbishop of Canterbury died in 1205, he needed replacing. Now, the Pope, who you should remember is the head of the Catholic Church, the head of the whole church organisation, he chose a man called Stephen Langton. So the Pope said, right, the old Archbishop, who was called Hubert Walter, by the way, the old Archbishop is dead. I think he should be replaced with, or by, Stephen Langton. Stephen Langton should be the new Archbishop of Canterbury. But John didn't want Stephen Langton to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. He wanted someone else. So John refused to accept Stephen Langton. He said, I'm not having Stephen Langton as the Archbishop. Even though the Pope insisted that John had to accept this, John said, no, it's England, it's my country. I decide who has this position, and it's not going to be Stephen Langton. So in response to this, in response to John saying no, the Pope excommunicated King John in 1209. And this meant that all English priests and bishops had their rights to conduct church services cancelled. In fact, I've got that on a separate sheet of paper. Forgetting that, I've got so many sheets of paper, I'm losing track. There you go. So this meant all English priests and bishops had their rights to conduct church services in England removed. So it's really serious. Being excommunicated, really, really serious. So this meant there couldn't be any baptisms, any weddings, any funerals, etc. until the Pope said so. And obviously he was only going to reverse that once John changed his mind and accepted Stephen Langton. And it actually took John 7 years to eventually change his mind and say to the Pope, all right, I'll accept Stephen Langton. So in all that time, in those 7 years, in all that time, the churches were shut. All the churches in England were shut. Now think about that. Think about how important religion was in medieval England. We've looked at this in our lessons. Religion is huge in medieval England. Everybody is a Christian. Pretty much everybody is a Christian in England. So for all the churches to be shut, this is massive. It's huge. Really, really serious thing. It means that any weddings that happened, wouldn't be seen as valid. So you weren't properly married to your wife or husband. People who died wouldn't be having a proper funeral. So there was the belief that they wouldn't make it to heaven because God kind of couldn't receive them properly. So if you didn't have a proper funeral, you weren't going to go to heaven. That's what they believed. Most significantly, I was talking about this in class to a few of you today. Most significantly, babies weren't being properly baptized. And remember that people believed that if you weren't baptized and you died, then you went straight to hell. Didn't matter how good you were or whether you'd done anything wrong or anything bad. If you weren't baptized, you went straight to hell when you died. That's what they believed. A lot of people back in the 1200s did die very young, either as babies or as small children. So all these parents who couldn't baptize their children, couldn't baptize their babies, were obviously, really, really upset because they thought, well, if my child dies, then they're going to go to hell. So, and this is all John's fault. That's the key thing. It's all John's fault. So everybody in England, not just the barons, but everybody in England is really, really upset with King John because it's his fault that this has happened. He's fallen out with the Pope over something fairly trivial in their minds anyway, because Stephen Langton would have made a perfectly good Archbishop of Canterbury, and in fact he did go on to make a perfectly good Archbishop of Canterbury. It's all John's fault that, as I say, the weddings aren't taking place properly, the funerals, and most importantly, the baptisms. So John meddled in ecclesiastical matters, and that really upset people, the barons in particular. Another thing that really upset the barons and angered them was John's record in war. So the magnates were really angry with John because he kept fighting against France and he kept losing. And every time he lost against France, not only did lots of people die, lots of English people die, which is bad enough in the battles. Every time he lost land. The French took land off him. That's the key thing. It's not so much that English people are dying, although that is, still pretty serious. It's the fact that every time he lost against France in these wars, he lost land in France. So, again, the barons are really, really upset about that because one of the most upsetting things about losing that land is a lot of the barons owned this land or had this land in France, had land in France. So every time he lost that land, they were losing land. Really upsettingly for a lot of people, he lost Normandy. And Normandy had obviously been part of the kingdom since William the Conqueror's time. So, for nearly 150 years, Normandy had been part of the kingdom. And now that was gone. France had it. They owned it. John's record in war earned him a rather unfortunate nickname. Soft Sword. That was a nickname that a lot of people gave to him. Soft Sword. It's fairly self-explanatory. He's not very good at fighting. It's like he's got a soft sword. Clearly, they're giving him a nickname like that. Clearly, he's not very popular and, he's being kind of ridiculed a little bit because of, his poor record in war. Another big issue for the magnates was taxes. Taxes. So that really, really upset the magnates, is taxation policy. Now, I said just now that he had a bad record against France in war. Obviously, another kind of impact of those wars is that wars cost money. They cost a huge amount of money. And John taxed the barons very heavily to pay for these wars. So that was another reason why the barons were upset with his record in war, because he was taking their money through tax to pay for these wars, and he kept losing. People are seeing that as quite a big waste of money. It's like, for God's sake, John, you take our money and you waste it on these wars. What a waste of money. Our money. Now, another thing that kind of upset the barons with taxation and with money was if the barons refused to fight in France, or wherever for that matter, if they refused to fight in France with John, or provide him with soldiers, as they were supposed to, as part of the feudal system, they could pay John could ask them, for something called scutage. Scutage is basically where the barons would pay for John to essentially buy soldiers to fight for him instead of using the barons' men. So that was possible. So the barons would say, look, you can't have my men for whatever reason, and I'm not going with you to fight, so therefore I'll give you this scutage so you can take that money and you can go and hire these soldiers to fight for you. Okay, known as mercenaries. So you can take that money and you can go and basically buy an army. But the scutage was also really, really expensive. It wasn't just a little bit of money, it was a lot of money. So again, the barons didn't like paying that either. So they don't like paying their taxes or losing their men fighting against France, and they don't like paying the scutage either because it's a huge amount of money. Especially, as I say, when John kept losing these wars in France. He also, to do with money, raised inheritance tax. So if a baron died and their son was going to inherit their land, which, was fairly normal, that's what would usually happen, John raised the inheritance tax. He raised it by many, many times. He didn't just double it or triple it. In some cases, he doubled it or tripled it. In some cases, he tried to get 10 times as much as he had before. So he said, right, the money you'd normally pay to inherit your father's land would be, this amount of money. Instead, I'm doubling it or tripling it or quadrupling it or what have you. And in fact, what was really unfair about this was John charged different people different amounts. So some barons who he maybe got on a little bit better with would be charged less than barons who he didn't like. And that's not fair. That's not fair because it should be the same amount of money for everybody. It should be the same level for everybody. So that made a lot of the barons upset. So hang on, baron over there only paid this much and I paid this much to inherit the land. Not fair at all. And finally, final thing that I'm going to talk about is John probably, almost certainly, murdered his nephew, Prince Arthur. So Prince Arthur was allegedly murdered by King John because he had a claim to the throne. Some would say a better claim to the throne. So John wanted him out of the way. Now, we don't know for sure that John killed him, but it's very likely, as John was really the only person who would have wanted Arthur dead. So it's unlikely to have been anybody else, but we can't say he definitely murdered Arthur, but he almost certainly did. And that obviously upset the barons, because, John is murdering he would have been 14 when he was killed. So John's murdered his 14-year-old nephew, who also has got a really good claim to the throne. That's not good. That's not good. It's one, he's killed someone, which isn't great anyway. 2, it's a child. 3, it's his nephew. And 4, it's someone who's got a claim to the throne of England. So, really, really bad on 4 separate counts. So another reason why, people, the barons, magnates, were really, really upset with John. Another thing as well that I mentioned to some of you, because different people have done different lessons so far. Some of you have only just started this, others were a bit further along. Talked about some of the things that John did the other day against the monks. I was talking to one class about John's actions against the church again. There's one particular story where he got particularly upset with a particular monastery, and John went to this monastery and basically just kicked out all of the monks from this monastery where they lived, even though some of them were sick or blind. That links back to what I was saying about John meddling with ecclesiastical matters. He fell out with the church and he kind of took his anger out on this monastery. Even though some of these monks were blind and old, John was like, right, don't care, out you go. So that just shows that John was a particularly cruel person as well. So, his cruelty was another reason why so many people were angry with him or upset with him. So they are just some of the reasons why the magnates and the barons in particular were upset with King John. So hopefully Year 7, that has pulled together all of the knowledge that you were putting together in your lessons today and last week and week before that for some of you. We're going to keep looking at King John, and we're going to look in particular at what the barons do when their anger just bubbles over, shall we say. We're going to look at what the barons do next to John. They don't let him off easily, shall we say. Right, so hopefully, as I say, you understand that a little bit more. And keep your eyes peeled. There may be some more videos coming soon, particularly before the end of year exams, which aren't too far away. But hopefully that's been of some use to you, and I will see you all very soon. Thank you.